Imagine a world where time itself had not yet been given a name, where the first human settlements were only beginning to emerge from the chaos of wild nature. It was a world in which humankind, step by step, learned to understand the sky, the earth, and the waters, where every discovery seemed like a miracle and every event a message from the beyond. At the center of this great story stands Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, which later would be called the cradle of civilization. Here, agriculture was born, the first temples were built, and the earliest cities arose. People began recording their thoughts for the first time on clay tablets, and myths and legends began to intertwine with reality. This land was a living book, where every stone and every wave carried within it a story. And it was here, among the sun-scorched plains and mighty rivers, that the first great civilizations were born: the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians. Our journey begins with simple reed huts along the riverbanks, where people first dared to unite into communities. They already knew that survival was impossible without mutual aid. Floods could destroy everything, and scorching heat could dry out the land. And this sense of unity became the foundation for the creation of the first society. Thus was born the idea of the city. But a city is not only buildings. It is, above all, faith, shared myths, and the worship of higher powers that, people believed, determined their fate. And the first scenes of this great drama we shall witness together, step by step, as we descend into the depths of millennia. Over time, these small settlements grew into something greater. People began to understand. If they joined forces, they could build canals to save themselves from drought. If several dozen families came together, they could raise walls around their village to protect it from outsiders. And gradually the first cities emerged, places like Uruk, Eridu, and Umma. These were not just settlements. They were the centers of a new civilization that transformed humanity's understanding of itself and the world. At the heart of every city rose immense temples, ziggurats. Their massive terraces stretched into the sky, like stairways to the gods. It was here that people brought their sacrifices. Here they felt the bond between earth and heaven. For them, the gods were not distant. They lived among humans, demanding bread, wine, prayers, and blood. People believed that if they failed to please the gods, the rivers would destroy their fields, and disease would strike down their families. But alongside faith, power was also born. Whoever controlled the temple controlled the people. Priests became the first rulers, and around the temples the earliest administrative systems appeared. It was here, in these cities, that the very idea of the state was born. Imagine a public square where people gathered to hear the priest proclaim the will of the gods. Imagine long processions with music, drums, and singing, as people brought offerings of grain, livestock, and textiles. All of this created a new order, a world where humans felt both greatness and fear. The cities of Mesopotamia increasingly differed from simple villages. Here appeared craftsmen who worked with metal, potters who created exquisite clay vessels, and scribes who studied a strange and mysterious art, leaving signs on soft tablets. These tablets, dried in the sun or fired in kilns, preserved words, numbers, and ideas. Gradually, people began to keep records of grain, livestock, and taxes. They even wrote down contracts between merchants who traveled in caravans to distant lands, bringing with them exotic goods, wood, stone, metals that were scarce in Mesopotamia itself. Imagine a marketplace filled with the voices of noisy traders. Some offered sacks of grain, others textiles, while still others displayed jewelry made of gleaming stones. Merchants arrived from foreign lands, and a scribe sat in the shade, noting down the weight and value of the goods on a tablet. This was how the economy was born, and with it, a new way of thinking. People learned to count, to negotiate, to keep records. It was a step from chaos to order. But it was not only the marketplace that made cities great. Art also began to flourish here. On the walls of temples and palaces appeared the first reliefs. In them, people sought to immortalize scenes of hunting, victories in battle, and solemn processions. Each carved stone, each seal impression was a symbol of grandeur and power. Thus, for the first time, humanity began to leave behind not just traces, but memory. But along with the development of the economy and art grew the need for governance. Cities were becoming more and more populated, and conflicts between communities increased. To establish order, the first laws appeared. At first, they were passed down orally, as divine commands that priests conveyed to the people. But later, the laws began to be recorded on clay tablets and later on stone stelae. This was a revolutionary step. Now the law was not only a word but also a visible, solid, unchanging symbol of justice. Recall the famous Code of Hammurabi. It would appear later, but its idea was born here, in the first cities. For the first time, people discovered that their rights and duties could be defined in writing. This made it possible to settle disputes, punish criminals, and protect the weak. For the first time, humanity began to realize that justice did not always depend on the power of the sword but could be based on writing and words. And along with the laws came the authority of the ruler. He was no longer just a priest or warrior. He was a king, chosen by the gods, destined to govern the people and safeguard order. Around him formed a court, an army, an administration. Thus was born the state in the truest sense of the word. And Mesopotamia became not only the cradle of cities but also the cradle of governance, law, and politics. Here, for the first time, the institutions were formed that would later become the foundation of the entire world. At the time when laws and authority were only beginning to take root, temples had long since become the heart of Mesopotamian cities. They towered above the dwellings of ordinary people like mountains rising from the plains. These were ziggurats, majestic, multi-tiered structures that seemed to connect earth and sky. Each level symbolized the path from the human world to the realm of the gods. The ziggurat was not only a religious center but also an economic and political hub. Here grain and weapons were stored, and here decisions were made that affected the entire city. The priests who served in the temples wielded immense influence. They could read and write, knew the movements of celestial bodies, and foretold eclipses and floods. To ordinary people, this was a true wonder. They believed the priests could hear the voices of the gods and relay their will. In temple archives were preserved records of harvests, trade, wars, prayers, and vows. This was a kind of library, a repository of the city's memory. The grandeur of the temples was awe-inspiring. Stone stairways led upward to the shrine dedicated to the city's chief deity. There burned sacrificial fires, the fragrance of resin and incense filled the air, and offerings were brought, from fruits and wine to animals. Crowds gathered to witness the rituals meant to secure prosperity and divine protection. And in these moments, everyone felt themselves part of a great mystery, part of a world where the earthly and the celestial merged into one. But life in Mesopotamia was not only about temple festivals and the wisdom of priests. It was harsh and often dangerous. The Tigris and Euphrates brought water and fertile soil, but at the same time they carried great peril. Floods could destroy harvests and wipe entire settlements from the earth. Each year, people struggled to survive, rebuilding canals, strengthening dikes, and clearing irrigation systems. This struggle with nature made them strong and hardened their spirit. It taught them to cooperate, for only together could they tame the elements. And yet, nature remained unpredictable. Summer brought scorching heat, when fields dried up and livestock perished from lack of water. Autumn could cover the land with sandstorms that darkened the sky. And it was precisely then that people clung even more tightly to their gods, believing that prayers and sacrifices could change fate. In these daily battles with nature, a distinctive worldview of the Mesopotamians was born, an awareness of life's fragility and the immense power of the gods on whom their very existence depended. These challenges made them inventive. They created complex irrigation systems that still astonish archaeologists today. They learned not only to subdue the forces of nature but also to harness their power. Thanks to this, Mesopotamia was able to become the cradle of civilization, for it was here that humanity first learned to transform the chaos of nature into the order of culture. Mesopotamia was not only the homeland of cities and temples, but also the cradle of writing. The emergence of cuneiform changed the way people thought. Every word inscribed on a clay tablet became a bridge between the past and the future. Knowledge was no longer passed down solely through oral tradition, It remained preserved on a material medium. Scribes trained for years, as they had to memorize hundreds of symbols, each with its own meaning. This gave rise to a distinct profession that held immense importance in society. Through writing, events could be documented, harvest lists compiled, goods accounted for, and treaties drawn up between cities and kings. From these records arose chronicles, annals that captured the history of generations. This gave people a sense of stability and memory, the awareness that they were part of something greater. Writing became an instrument of power, wisdom, and control. Beyond practical purposes, writing also spurred the growth of culture. Myths, legends, religious texts, magical formulas, all were recorded on clay tablets. In this way, the first literary works were born. They conveyed beliefs, moral lessons, stories of heroes and gods, and most importantly, they could outlive time. The cities of Mesopotamia became centers of knowledge, and their libraries, temples of wisdom. But Mesopotamia was not only a center of culture, science, and art. It was also the birthplace of military strategy. The cities constantly competed for resources, fertile lands, and control over the rivers. The first professional armies arose, along with the skills of building fortifications, walls, and strongholds. Military discipline, tactics, and logistics developed side by side with the achievements of civilization. Technologies emerged that allowed people to defend themselves and control territories. Weapons were made from bronze, and people learned to wield bows, spears, and shields. Battle tactics included ranks, formations, and command signals. Armies were recruited from city dwellers and mercenaries, and warfare ceased to be a chaotic clash, becoming instead an organized confrontation. This very organization gave cities an advantage over tribes and smaller settlements. At the same time, war shaped society. Noble warriors gained status, and victors conquered new lands. Yet conflict also encouraged diplomacy, peace treaties, alliances, marriages between ruling houses. In this way, the people of Mesopotamia learned to balance strength with wisdom, war with diplomacy. These lessons would remain a legacy for the entire world. Over time, the religious beliefs of Mesopotamia grew more complex. The gods intervened in every sphere of life, from harvest to war, from the birth of a child to the death of an elder. Each city had its own patron deity, and the god's name reflected the character and mission of the settlement. People believed that daily actions, prayers, and rituals could influence the will of the gods. This faith shaped social morality, customs, laws, and even the economy. Priests were mediators between gods and people, and their prophecies influenced politics and daily life. Sacred rituals and ceremonies could last for hours. Fire, incense, music, sacrifices, all this created an atmosphere of grandeur and fear at once. People gathered around the priests, listened to their sermons, and learned to recognize divine signs. Because of this, faith permeated every aspect of life. It influenced the daily routine, choice of profession, marriages, and social relations. Myths conveyed the history of the world and the laws by which people were to live. Legends about gods, heroes, and epic deeds provided examples of courage, wisdom, and justice. Children from an early age listened to these stories, memorized them, and repeated them, thereby continuing the cultural heritage. Faith and myths formed the unshakable foundation of civilization, ensuring its resilience against the challenges of time. In parallel with religion and culture, Mesopotamia developed science and astronomy. Knowledge of the movements of the sun, moon, and stars helped in planning sowing, harvests, and religious festivals. Observations of the sky gradually turned into an exact science. Priest astronomers created calendars, predicted eclipses, and calculated the lengths of months and seasons. This knowledge became a key to the civilization's success. But science was inseparable from religion. The heavens and the earth were seen as manifestations of divine will. The accuracy of observations determined the prosperity of cities, the yield of crops, and even the fate of kings. Precision and methodical study demonstrated a high level of thought and social organization. Those who possessed knowledge held authority and influence. for their predictions helped avoid natural disasters and ensured stability. Together with mathematics, astronomy enabled the creation of architectural wonders. Measurements, calculations, and precise proportions were used in the construction of temples, ziggurats, and city walls. All these achievements were interconnected. Religion, science, art, and social organization formed a single system that ensured the prosperity of Mesopotamia for millennia. Mesopotamia was also the birthplace of the first great legal systems. Laws were not merely a set of rules, they reflected ethical norms, justice, and social structure. The Code of Hammurabi became the symbol of this approach. It covered property relations, family matters, punishments for crimes, and trade agreements. Every clause of the law was meant to ensure order and discipline within society. Thanks to it, people knew their rights and duties, and authority gained legitimacy. The laws touched daily life, from ordinary conflicts to major disputes between cities. Justice and punishment were strictly regulated, giving people a sense of security and stability. The code also embodied moral values, religious beliefs, and social priorities. People learned to live by principles that promoted harmony and cooperation in their cities. Legal norms also stimulated economic growth. Merchants knew that contracts would be honored and disputes resolved according to law. This made it possible to carry out large projects, exchange goods, and build infrastructure. Law and justice became the foundation of Mesopotamia's prosperity and left their mark on the entire history of humankind. The art and culture of Mesopotamia developed alongside science and law. Sculpture, bas-reliefs, and carvings on temple walls told stories of gods and heroes. Every ornament, every image carried meaning. They conveyed religious beliefs, political power, and historical events. Art was a means of communication, a way to leave a mark in the memory of generations. Music and dance also held an important place. Public festivals, religious rituals, and ceremonies were accompanied by the sounds of the lyre, flute, and drums. Music was not just entertainment. It emphasized the significance of events, strengthened social bonds, and conveyed the emotions of generations. Children learned rhythms and melodies, passing this knowledge down through the ages. The civilization of Mesopotamia showed that the development of culture, science, law, and religion could progress side by side. These spheres interacted, supported one another, and created a stable, flourishing system. People felt themselves part of a great history, and their achievements left a legacy that continues to influence the world today. Mesopotamia was not only a civilization of science and religion, but also an economic power of its time. Trade, crafts, and agriculture, everything was organized and regulated. Cities became centers of exchange, where merchants from different regions met. Trade routes stretched along rivers, deserts, and mountains, connecting cities and kingdoms. The exchange of goods was not limited to material wealth. Along with them, knowledge, technologies, culture, and religious beliefs were transmitted. Production became more specialized. Blacksmiths, potters, weavers, builders honed their skills and passed them on to the next generations. Mastery and experience united into professional guilds. Trade contracts, laws, and quality control ensured stability and trust between cities. The economy of Mesopotamia became an example of how an organized society is capable of creating prosperity and interconnection between different aspects of life. People saw in their prosperity not only material benefit but also social responsibility. Every profession, every activity influenced the development of society. Because of this, the economy was not just a mechanism of survival but a true engine of civilization. Knowledge, culture, science, and religion were integrated with the economy, creating a strong foundation on which Mesopotamia stood. The final scene emphasizes the legacy of Mesopotamia. Majestic ziggurats, city walls, temples, writing, art, sciences, and laws, all of this became the foundation for later civilizations. Today we can only imagine how the city lived, feel its atmosphere, see the people who were the first to write history. Mesopotamia taught humanity organization, cooperation, the pursuit of knowledge, and interaction with the gods and nature. For centuries, scholars and researchers have studied tablets and reliefs, reconstructing ancient culture. And although many details remain a mystery, the influence of this civilization is still felt today in law, astronomy, architecture, and urban organization. The cities of Mesopotamia were more than just settlements. They were a living organism that united people, the divine, and nature into a harmonious system. Their legacy reminds us that civilization is not only material achievements, but also wisdom, knowledge, culture, and the ability to pass them on to the next generations. By studying Mesopotamia, we understand how humanity learned to cooperate, create, think systematically, and honor the past in order to build the future.